A patrol car, sleek and out of place, sits like a wound on the scorched earth of the ranch. An old man, weathered and wise, watches from the porch, a silent storm brewing behind his eyes. A younger man, his grandson, feels the tension crackle. In the air, a familiar ache of injustice. The Homeowners Association has overstepped again. The car is a symbol of their arrogance, their disregard. The old man, a man of the land and a quiet fury, walks toward a rusted tractor, a tool of his trade. The younger man knows what's coming, a slow burn of revenge. The engine groans to life, and the tractor moves, a relentless machine of justice, dragging the offending car not to a tow lot, but toward a muddy creek, where the past and future of the family's land meet in a violent, righteous splash. The sun, a relentless eye of fire, beat down on the parched earth of the Oak Haven Ranch. Dust devils danced across the fields, mimicking the restless spirit that always seemed to stir within the old man, Silas Oakhaven. At 82, he was a living relic, his skin a road map. Of every summer, every drought, every triumph and tragedy etched into the land, he had worked his entire life. He sat on the porch swing, its rhythmic creak a metronome to the quiet fury brewing in his chest. His grandson, Leo, leaned against the porch railing, his posture a mirror of his grandfather's tension. "He's been there for an hour, Grandpa," Leo said, his voice a low growl. "Just sitting there, staring at the fields like he owns them." Silas didn't respond, but his gaze, fixed on the gleaming white sedan parked in the middle of their lower pasture, was all the answer Leo needed. It was a vehicle that screamed authority, a gleaming symbol of the Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association. The letters, painted in a sterile blue, were a constant reminder of the encroachment they had faced for years. First, it was the new houses, sprawling like a suburban plague on the hills surrounding their ranch. Then came the rules, the regulations, the endless letters about property aesthetics and zoning compliance. And now, this, an HOA patrol car, parked on their private land without so much as a knock on the door. The man inside, a young, slick-haired kid with a face far too smug for his age, had his phone propped on the dashboard, his attention fixed on a video playing on the screen. He was completely oblivious to the two men watching him, a fact that only fueled Silas's indignation. Leo, on the other hand, felt the familiar surge of a different kind of anger, a hot, reckless rage that often landed him in trouble. "I'm gonna go talk to him," Leo said, pushing off the railing. "No." Silas's voice, though quiet, was sharp enough to stop Leo in his tracks. "You'll just make it worse, boy." "Make it worse?" Leo shot back, his hands clenching into fists. "He's trespassing. Grandpa, this is our land. This is an invasion. And that's why we're not going to give them a reason to call the sheriff," Silas said, his eyes finally moving from the car to his grandson. "We're not going to be the ones to start a fight they've been waiting for." Leo knew his grandfather was right, but the logic didn't soothe the burning in his gut. They had already been fined for unapproved fence repairs, for the rust on their old barn, for unsightly farm equipment. Each fine was a deliberate chip at their resolve, a slow, methodical attempt to bleed them dry until they sold their land to the developers. This car was just the latest salvo in a long, drawn-out war. "What are we gonna do then?" Leo asked, the frustration heavy in his voice. "Just let him sit there?" Silas looked back at the car, his gaze unwavering. "He's not a person, Leo. He's a tool, a way to get under our skin, and we're not going to react the way they want us to." "So we just ignore him?" Leo scoffed. "He's watching us, Grandpa. He's probably filming us right now, just waiting for us to do something he can twist into a violation." "He can film all he wants," Silas said, a ghost of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "But he can't film what he can't see." Leo frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Silas pushed himself up from the swing, his joints protesting with a chorus of groans. He walked to the edge of the porch, his eyes sweeping across the sprawling pasture, the familiar landscape of his life. His gaze settled on the dilapidated old tractor, a beast of a machine from a bygone era parked near the barn. "We need to go to town anyway," Silas said, his voice suddenly filled with a strange, knowing calm. "Pick up some feed, and maybe a new part for the irrigation pump." Leo's brow furrowed. "But the car?" "The car," Silas said, finally turning to face his grandson, a spark of mischief in his ancient eyes. "We'll be right where we left it. Or, well, not exactly where we left it." A slow grin spread across Leo's face as the puzzle pieces clicked into place. His grandfather wasn't going to confront the man. He wasn't going to get in a shouting match or a physical altercation. He was going to use his knowledge of the land, his old man ingenuity, to make a point. "The tractor?" Leo whispered, a thrill of anticipation running through him. Silas winked. "He's got a fancy car, but it's not made for this kind of ground. A little rain, a little mud, a little unforeseen circumstance, and that car will be a lot less compliant with HOA rules." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. This was better than a fight. This was strategy. This was the kind of poetic justice his grandfather was a master of. As they walked toward the truck, the sleek white Seddon seemed to hum with an arrogance that was almost unbearable. They drove past it slowly, Silas giving the man inside a placid wave, a gesture so devoid of emotion it was almost an insult. The HOA patrolman, a self-important smirk on his face, waved back, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing. They spent the next few hours in town running errands, talking to the local feed store owner, a man who had known Silas his whole life and was well aware of the ongoing feud. When they returned, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a fiery blaze of orange and purple. The patrol car was still there, but the man was gone. He had gotten out of the car, probably to stretch his legs, and was now standing by the fence line, talking on his phone, his back to the road. It was the perfect opportunity. "Get the tractor," Silas said, his voice low and urgent. Leo didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted to the barn, the old engine roaring to life with a satisfying cough and sputter. He drove it out, the massive tires kicking up dust, a primal beast of a machine. Silas, meanwhile, walked toward the car, a coil of heavy-duty chain in his hand. He moved with a speed that belied his age, wrapping the chain securely around the front axle of the patrol car. The sound of metal scraping against metal was loud in the sudden silence of the evening. Leo pulled the tractor into position, his eyes locked on his grandfather. The patrolman, still on his phone, suddenly turned, his eyes widening in shock. "Hey, what are you doing?" he yelled, his voice a panicked squawk. Silas ignored him, giving Leo a sharp nod. "Now, boy, the creek!" Leo dropped the tractor's bucket and pushed the gear into drive. The chain tightened with a metallic thud, and the patrol car lurched forward, its tires spinning uselessly. The patrolman, his phone still clutched in his hand, started running toward the car, but it was too late. The tractor, a relentless force of nature, was already dragging the car across the pasture, a trail of ripped-up sod and broken dirt marking its path. "Stop! Stop, you crazy old man!" the patrolman screamed, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Silas simply watched, a serene expression on his face. The tractor moved slowly, deliberately, a funeral procession for the car's misplaced sense of authority. The patrolman, realizing he couldn't stop them, pulled out his phone again, his frantic movements a desperate attempt to call for backup. The creek was at the lowest point of the pasture, a ribbon of water that had long since been little more than a muddy trickle, but recent rains had left the banks soft and the bottom a quagmire of thick, black mud. Leo guided the tractor to the very edge of the bank, and with a final, decisive push, the front tires of the patrol car slipped, sending the vehicle lurching forward. The chain went slack with a loud clatter as the car's front half plunged into the mud, a sickening splash echoing across the field. The patrolman, now standing on the bank, stared at his car half submerged in the thick brown muck. The sun had set, and the last remnants of light cast a surreal, hellish glow on the scene. Leo killed the engine of the tractor, and the silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic, enraged breaths of the patrolman. Silas walked to the edge of the creek, his hands in his pockets. He looked down at the patrolman, a small, triumphant smile on his lips. "I told you, son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is Oakhaven land, and we don't take kindly to trespassers." The patrolman's face was a mask of furious, impotent rage. He stared at the old man, his eyes burning with a hatred that promised a terrible reckoning. "You're gonna pay for this, you old bastard," he hissed. "You're gonna lose everything." Silas just smiled, the darkness of the night swallowing the smugness from the man's face. "Maybe," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but at least my car is clean." Part 2. The mud-caked patrol car sat in the Oakhaven Creek like a monument to defiance. Its once gleaming white surface was now streaked with black sludge, its front wheels swallowed by the muck. The flashing blue and red lights, powerless and inert, were a pathetic mockery of authority. A small crowd had gathered on the county road above, their car headlights casting a surreal, cinematic glow on the scene. They were a mix of neighbors, curious onlookers, and a few reporters who had caught wind of the spectacle. Leo stood on the creek bank, watching the spectacle unfold, the triumphant smirk still on his face. The HOA patrolman, a man named Henderson, was pacing back and forth on the opposite bank, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a high-pitched, panicked squeal. "I'm telling you, Sheriff, he drove his tractor into my car. He's a menace, a lunatic." "He's a menace, huh?" a calm, deliberate voice said from behind Leo. Leo turned to see Sheriff Miller, a man with a weathered face and a quiet dignity, standing beside him. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans, a testament to the late hour and the informal nature of the county. He looked at the patrolman, his face devoid of emotion. "Henderson," Sheriff Miller said, his voice carrying across the creek, "you're trespassing, and you're on private property. What exactly did you expect to happen?" Henderson's jaw dropped. But he damaged my car. He towed it into the creek. This is destruction of property." "You're the one who parked it there," Sheriff Miller said, his tone a mix of exasperation and dry wit. "I'm not seeing any signs that say no-go for tractors." The crowd of onlookers chuckled, a wave of low laughter rippling through the night. Henderson's face, already flushed with anger, turned a deeper shade of crimson. "This isn't funny. This is a violation of my authority." "Your authority ends at the county line, Henderson," Sheriff Miller said, his voice hardening. "And you're well within Oakhaven's property. Now, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm only going to say it once. You have two options. You can call a tow truck and get your car out of the creek, or I can impound it for trespassing," Henderson sputtered, his mind reeling. But the HOA... "The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over private property, Henderson," Sheriff Miller said, his gaze fixed on the man. "And this is a ranch, not a subdivision. You're lucky he didn't shoot you." A hush fell over the crowd. The sheriff's words, a quiet but firm statement of truth, hung in the air. Henderson's bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold, unsettling fear. He knew he had overstepped, but the reality of his mistake was now sinking in, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. Silas, meanwhile, was on the porch, a satisfied smile on his face. He watched as the tow truck, a behemoth of a machine, arrived, its powerful winch groaning as it tried to free the car from the mud. The process was slow and arduous, the car's wheels refusing to budge from the thick, tenacious muck. "He's in for a long night," Leo said, his voice filled with a sense of righteous satisfaction. Silas just nodded, his eyes fixed on the struggling tow truck. That's what they get for messing with the land. The land always wins. The next morning, the sun rose on a scene that was both comical and telling. The patrol car was finally out of the creek, but it was a pathetic sight. The white paint was chipped and scratched, the front bumper was dented, and the interior was a mess of mud and water. Henderson, looking haggard and defeated, stood beside it, his uniform a mess. A group of reporters descended on him, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrusting toward his face. "Mr. Henderson, what happened here?" a reporter asked. "Was this an act of vandalism?" Henderson, flustered and humiliated, stammered, No, it was a misunderstanding. I was on a patrol and I got stuck." "Stuck in the creek?" another reporter asked, a smirk on her face. "Seems like a strange place for an HOA patrol." Henderson's face contorted with anger. He knew he was being ridiculed, but he was powerless to stop it. He had called his boss, the head of the HOA, a man named Mr. Finch. But Finch had only been interested in one thing, avoiding a lawsuit. "This is a PR nightmare, Henderson," Finch had barked over the phone. "I don't care how it happened, just get it fixed and make sure this doesn't get out of control. We can't have the whole county laughing at us." "But what about Oak Haven?" Henderson had protested. "What about the damage to my car?" "The car is a write-off, you idiot," Finch had screamed. "You're a liability. Just get out of there and don't make it any worse." Henderson, his career and reputation in tatters, watched as the reporters moved on, their attention now fixed on Silas and Leo. "Mr. Oakhaven, what happened here?" a reporter asked. Silas, with a calm and dignified air, stepped forward. "A man parked his car on our land without permission," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We have a lot of farm equipment. Sometimes things get in the way." "So you're saying it was an accident?" the reporter pressed. Silas looked at the patrol car, a mischievous glint in his eye. "An accident?" he said, as if considering the word. "I suppose you could call it that. An unfortunate confluence of a tow chain and a muddy creek, a lesson perhaps in respecting boundaries." The reporters, sensing the subtext, chuckled. They wrote down his words, and the next day, the story went viral. HOA's hubris meets Oak Haven's ingenuity, old man's justice, HOA cop towed into creek, and rancher teaches HOA a lesson in respect. The story became a symbol of a larger struggle, a David and Goliath tale that resonated with people all over the country. The HOA, once a seemingly unstoppable force, was now a laughingstock. The fines and letters stopped coming. The calls from the developers ceased. For a brief, glorious moment, the Oak Haven Ranch was at peace. But as the days turned into weeks, an ominous silence settled over the ranch. It was a silence that was far more unnerving than the constant barrage of threats and fines. Leo felt it in his bones, a quiet dread that something terrible was coming. "It's too quiet, Grandpa," he said one evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the night sky. "They're just licking their wounds, boy," Silas said, his voice calm, but his eyes were filled with a familiar weariness. "They'll be back, and next time they won't be sending a kid in a patrol car. They'll be sending lawyers." And he was right. The following week, a letter arrived. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't a warning. It was a court order. The Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association was suing them for $1 million in damages. Part 3. The legal document, a thick sheaf of paper bound in a stiff blue cover, felt heavier than its weight. The words, filled with jargon and legalese, swam before Leo's eyes, but one phrase stood out like a brand. $1 million in damages. He dropped the paper on the kitchen table as if it were on fire. "This is insane, Grandpa," he said, his voice a disbelieving whisper. $1 million? For a damn car? Silas, sitting across from him, didn't flinch. He picked up the document, his old eyes scanning the text with a quiet intensity. He was a man who had faced down droughts, floods, and market crashes, but this was a different kind of storm. This wasn't a force of nature. It was a force of pure, human malice. "They're not suing us for the car, boy," Silas said, his voice flat. "They're suing us for our land." Leo's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on the absurdity of the amount that he hadn't considered the real endgame. This wasn't about a damaged vehicle. It was about an opportunity. They had dragged the HOA's authority through the mud, and now the HOA was fighting back with the only weapon they had left, the law. $1 million judgment would bankrupt them, forcing them to sell the ranch to pay the debt. "We need a lawyer," Leo said, his mind racing. "A good one." "A good lawyer costs money," Silas said, looking at the number on the document. "Money we don't have." The silence in the kitchen was filled with the crushing weight of their predicament. They were isolated, two men against a well-funded corporate entity. The hope and triumph of the previous week now felt like a distant, naive dream. The victory had been so sweet, but the retribution was so much more bitter. Leo refused to give up. He spent the next few days on the phone, calling every lawyer in the county and the nearest city, even a few in the state capital. The answer was always the same. "The case is a public spectacle. The HOA has deep pockets. It's too risky." Or, more often, "We can't take on $1 million case without a substantial retainer." He was met with closed doors and polite but firm refusals. The story, which had once been their moment of glory, was now a mark of their untouchability. No one wanted to be associated with the crazy old man who towed a cop car into a creek. One evening, defeated, Leo sat on the porch, staring out at the land he was so close to losing. He was so caught up in his despair that he didn't hear the car pull up the driveway. A beat-up, rusty truck with a bumper sticker that read, "I'd rather be fishing," idled near the barn. A man with a kind, weathered face, dressed in a faded flannel shirt and jeans, got out. "Leo Oakhaven?" the man asked. Leo nodded, his mind a blur of exhaustion. "My name's Sam," the man said, extending a hand. "Sam Hayes. I'm a lawyer." Leo stared at him. This wasn't what he expected. No suit, no fancy car, no briefcase. Just a man who looked like he belonged on a fishing boat more than in a courtroom. "I saw the news," Sam said, a sad smile on his face. "Saw what they're trying to do to you. It's a damn shame." You're here to help?" Leo asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "My grandpappy used to tell me stories about Silas Oakhaven," Sam said, looking toward the old man, who had come out of the house. "Said he was a man of the land, a man who knew the difference between right and wrong. When I saw what they were doing to him, it just didn't sit right with me." Silas walked toward them, his gaze fixed on Sam's face. "You a country lawyer?" he asked. "Something like that," Sam said, a small, knowing smile on his lips. "I specialize in property disputes and in common sense." Leo felt a surge of hope he hadn't realized he was missing. This man, with his quiet confidence and his connection to the land, was their last chance. They sat on the porch for hours, talking. Sam listened patiently as they explained the long history of the conflict, the endless fines, the harassment, the final audacious act of towing the car into the creek. He didn't laugh. He didn't judge. He just listened. "Here's the thing," Sam said when they were finished. "They're not just suing you for the car. They're trying to make an example of you. They're trying to scare everyone else in the area into compliance. And they're using a common law principle called nuisance. They're going to argue that your ranch, your actions, are a public nuisance that diminishes the property value of the entire development." "But that's crazy," Leo said. "The ranch was here first. They built their homes around us." "Doesn't matter," Sam said, shaking his head. "The law is not always on the side of common sense, but we're going to fight them, and we're not going to play by their rules." Over the next few weeks, Sam became a fixture at the ranch. He walked the fields with Silas, his boots getting muddy, his eyes studying the land. He talked to the old man, not just about the lawsuit, but about the history of the ranch, the years of hard work and sacrifice that had gone into it. He learned about the Oak Haven legacy. He knew they weren't just fighting for their land. They were fighting for their family's identity. One afternoon, Sam was standing in the middle of the lower pasture, staring at the spot where the patrol car had been. "I've been thinking about this nuisance argument," he said to Silas and Leo. "They're saying your ranch is a nuisance, a blight on the landscape." "It's a working ranch," Silas said, his voice filled with a quiet indignation. "It's what it's always been." "Exactly," Sam said, a glint in his eye. "So what if we show the court that the real nuisance isn't the ranch? What if we show them that the real nuisance is the Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association?" He laid out his plan. It was audacious, risky, and unlike anything a typical lawyer would ever suggest. It was a strategy that was born not in a law library, but in the heart of the Oak Haven Ranch. Sam had found something. A single line in the HOA's original charter, a relic from a time before the developers had taken over. A forgotten clause that no one had ever paid attention to. The day of the preliminary hearing, the courtroom was packed. The local press was there, along with a sea of residents from the Oak Haven Hills development, their faces a mix of curiosity and condemnation. The HOA's lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man, presented their case with an air of practiced arrogance. He spoke of property devaluation, aesthetic degradation, and the reckless and dangerous actions of the defendant. He made the ranch sound like a junkyard, and Silas and Leo sound like a public menace. When it was Sam's turn to speak, he didn't call any witnesses. He didn't present a long, complicated argument. He simply walked to the front of the courtroom, a single document in his hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, "my client's actions were not an act of malice. They were a reaction to an illegal and sustained campaign of harassment by the Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association." The HOA's lawyer scoffed. "Objection, Your Honor. The plaintiff is making a frivolous claim." "Overruled," the judge said, a glint of interest in her eye. "I'd like to hear what he has to say." Sam continued. "I submit to this court the original charter of the Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association. In it, a single line on page 47 that was put there by the original residents of this land decades ago." He read the line aloud, his voice gaining power with every word. "It shall be the duty of this association to preserve the rural character of the Oak Haven Hills community, to protect the rights of the original landowners, and to ensure that the spirit of the land is upheld." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. The HOA's lawyer's face went white. He knew what was coming. "Your Honor," Sam concluded, "the Oak Haven Ranch is not a nuisance. It is the very embodiment of the rural character this association was created to protect. The true nuisance, the true violation of this charter, is the Oak Haven Hills Homeowners Association, which has systematically ignored its founding principles, harassed the very people it was sworn to protect, and, in a fit of misplaced arrogance, towed its own car into a creek. They are suing the Oak Haven family for preserving the very spirit of the land they themselves promised to uphold." The judge stared at the HOA's lawyer, a look of profound skepticism on her face. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Silas's face. Sam had found not just a defense, but a weapon. He had turned the HOA's own weapon against them. He wasn't just fighting the lawsuit, he was striking at the very heart of their legitimacy. Part 4. The courtroom was in an uproar. The judge, a woman known for her steely composure, pounded her gavel, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Order! Order in this court!" she bellowed. The HOA's lawyer, A man who had looked so confident moments before now stood sputtering, his expensive suit looking a size too big. "Your Honor, this is outrageous! A cheap stunt! A misinterpretation of a decades-old document!" "Is it, Mr. Sterling?" the judge said. Her eyes narrowed. "I'll be the judge of that. I've read the charter. The defense's interpretation, while certainly unorthodox, is not without merit." She fixed her gaze on Sterling. "Your case is based on the claim that the Oakhaven Ranch is a public nuisance that devalues the homes in your development. The very document that grants you the authority to exist states that your purpose is to protect the rural character of the community. How can you claim that the very essence of that character is a nuisance?" Sterling stammered, his carefully constructed argument crumbling around him. "Your Honor, the purpose of the HOA has evolved. We are a modern organization dedicated to property, values, and community standards." "Then you are in violation of your own charter," the judge said, her voice like a knife. "I'm not going to throw out the case, not yet. But I am going to issue a temporary restraining order on any further harassment or legal action against the Oakhaven family, and I want to see the original charter and all subsequent amendments, as well as a full accounting of all fines and legal fees paid by the Oakhaven family on my desk by Monday morning." Sterling's face turned a shade of sickly green. The judge had not only put a halt to their lawsuit, but had also forced them to expose their entire financial history with the Oakhaven family. As they left the courtroom, a small crowd of people, from the Oakhaven Hills development, the same people who had jeered at them a week ago, now looked at Silas and Leo with a mix of surprise and grudging admiration. They had seen the arrogance of their own HOA firsthand, and the tide was beginning to turn. Back at the ranch, Silas, Leo, and Sam sat on the porch, a quiet sense of triumph in the air. "You did it, Sam," Leo said, his voice filled with awe. "You flipped the whole thing on its head." "We've won a battle, not the war," Sam said, but a satisfied smile played on his lips. "This is just the first step. They're going to come back harder now. They'll try to find some other way to get at you." He was right. The HOA, reeling from the public humiliation and the judge's order, went into a frenzy. The head of the HOA, Mr. Finch, a man who had been a faceless voice on the phone, now became a very real and very dangerous enemy. He had been a real estate developer for 30 years, and he wasn't about to let an old man and his grandson derail his multi-million-dollar project. The next day, a series of trucks pulled up to the fence line of the Oakhaven Ranch. They weren't from a tow company. They were from a heavy machinery rental company. A crew of workers began to construct a massive chain-link fence topped with barbed wire just a few feet from the Oakhaven property line. It was an intimidating, ugly thing, a deliberate visual insult. "What are they doing?" Leo asked, his stomach tightening with a familiar dread. "They're not trespassing," Silas said, his voice filled with a cold rage. "They're just building a fence on their side of the line." The fence was an ugly, deliberate act of aggression. It blocked the view of the lower pasture, cast a permanent shadow on a section of their land, and was an ever-present reminder of the HOA's contempt. It was a perfectly legal act of malice. Then came the second salvo. The city's zoning board, which had been in Finch's pocket for years, issued a new ordinance. The Oakhaven Ranch, a historical and cultural landmark, was now rezoned as a commercial property, citing a clause about its potential for a resort or event venue. The new zoning came with a crippling new set of property taxes, taxes that would increase exponentially over the next few years. The message was clear. If they wouldn't sell, the HOA would force them to sell by making it financially impossible to hold on to the land. "This is how they're going to do it," Silas said, his hands clenched into fists. "They're going to tax us out of our own home." Sam, who had been on the phone with his contacts at the city, confirmed their fears. "There's no legal recourse. The City Council pushed it through in a special closed-door session. It's perfectly legal and perfectly evil. But as the days went by, the Oakhaven family, far from being defeated, grew more determined. They had been pushed to their breaking point, and they were ready to push back. They weren't going to fight this in court. They were going to fight this on their own terms. One night, Leo found his grandfather in the barn, his old hands running over the smooth, rusted metal of his grandfather's tractor. "What are we going to do, Grandpa?" he asked. "We're going to fight fire with fire," Silas said, his eyes fixed on the land. "They think they can use the law to take our home, but the law isn't the only thing that matters. Not out here." Silas revealed his plan, a plan born of years of fighting on the land, of fighting for survival. It wasn't a legal strategy. It was a plan that was as much a part of the ranch as the soil itself. It was a plan that was as old as the hills themselves. The next morning, the HOA crew arrived to continue building their fence. They worked with a smug efficiency, their laughter and chatter echoing across the land. But as they worked, they heard a low, rhythmic grinding sound. They looked up to see Silas, at the wheel of his old tractor, driving slowly, methodically, toward the far end of the property. They watched him, a strange curiosity in their faces. They couldn't see what he was doing, but they could hear the thud, thud, thud of the old engine as he worked. They thought he was just doing some landscaping, but they were wrong. As the day wore on, the thud, thud, thud continued, a relentless, powerful sound. By the time the sun began to set, the fence builders, tired and ready to go home, looked across the field to see what Silas had been up to. Their laughter died in their throats. Their smug smiles evaporated. They stared at the ground in front of the fence, a collective gasp of disbelief escaping their lips. In the middle of the field, stretching from one end of the property line to the other, was a deep, wide, perfectly straight ditch, and it was filling with water. Silas had found the old forgotten irrigation canal that ran under the property, a relic from the first Oakhaven's time. He had used his tractor to breach the canal, and now a small but steady stream of water was flowing into the ditch that was now directly in front of their brand-new fence, the ditch that would soon be a moat. The fence builders, their work now utterly pointless, stared in a horrified silence. They had built a beautiful, pristine fence, a monument to their owner's spite, and Silas had just turned it into a monument to their futility. Part 5. The moat was a masterstroke of rustic genius. The ditch, now filled with a shimmering 2-foot-deep ribbon of water, stretched the entire length of the property line, rendering the brand-new chain-link fence a useless, expensive ornament. The HOA crew stared at their work, their faces a mix of stupefied disbelief and utter defeat. The fence, meant to be a symbol of their dominance, was now an island, unapproachable and entirely pointless. The crew leader, a burly man with a permanent scowl, stomped over to the fence, his boots sinking into the soft earth at the edge of the newly formed moat. He yelled across to Silas, who was sitting on the porch swing, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You can't do this, old man. This is an act of aggression. We're calling the cops." Silas took a slow sip of his coffee. "I'm not doing anything but a little irrigation, son," he called back, his voice a calm rumble. "My property, my right to water it, and I'm not trespassing. Your fence is on your land. My ditch is on mine." The crew leader turned, a vein throbbing in his temple. He knew Silas was right. The HOA's legal team had been so concerned with property lines that they had forgotten the most fundamental rule of the land. A man can do whatever he wants on his own property, as long as he doesn't cross the line, and Silas had not crossed the line. He had simply created a new one. When the police arrived, they found a small army of lawyers and HOA officials, led by a livid Mr. Finch, staring at the moat as if it were a biblical plague. Finch, a man who had only been a voice on the phone, was now a pale, trembling figure in an expensive suit, his face a mask of impotent rage. "Officer, look at this!" Finch shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at the water. "This is a hazard, a deliberate act of sabotage. He's trying to ruin my project." The officer, a young man who had grown up in the county and knew Silas by reputation, looked from Finch to the serene old man on the porch. "Sir," the officer said calmly, "he's a rancher. He's digging a ditch. I don't see a crime here." "It's a moat," Finch insisted. "He's trapping my fence," the officer shrugged. "Looks like an irrigation trench to me. Your fence just happens to be on the other side. Seems like a simple case of a man maintaining his land." Finch, utterly defeated, stood staring at the water, his perfect plan in ruins. The taxes, the legal battles, the fence, all of it had been an attempt to force Silas out. But Silas had simply responded with a different kind of logic, the logic of the land. The story of the moat spread like wildfire, a final beautiful chapter. In the Oakhaven saga, the Oakhaven Hills residents, already disillusioned with their HOA, now saw the organization for what it was, a bully with no common sense. The local news ran a segment with a live shot of the fence, standing uselessly behind a body of water. The reporter, a young woman with a smirk on her face, described the scene as an epic battle between two different worlds, and a beautiful display of old-school grit winning the day. The HOA's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, called Sam Hayes the next morning. "Sam," he said, his voice flat with defeat, "we're dropping the lawsuit. It's over. This is a public relations nightmare, and Finch is getting torn apart. We're filing for a dismissal with prejudice." Sam just chuckled. "I'll be waiting for the paperwork." The day after, a crew of trucks arrived again. But this time, they were there to dismantle the fence. The barbed wire, the chain link, the steel posts, all of it was taken down and loaded onto flatbed trucks. The ground was leveled and the moat was filled in. It was as if the entire ordeal had never happened. But it had. And it had changed everything. The next week, another letter arrived. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a request for a meeting. Silas, Leo, and Sam sat on the porch, watching as a fleet of black SUVs pulled up the driveway. Out of the lead vehicle stepped Mr. Finch, no longer looking like a furious CEO, but like a man who had been humbled. He was flanked by the other members of the HOA board. They sat on the porch, a silent, tense assembly. Finch finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost unrecognizable. "Mr. Oakhaven, we made a mistake. We misjudged you. We were wrong." Silas looked at the man, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Wrong about what, Mr. Finch?" Finch swallowed hard. "Wrong about everything. We were so focused on control and property value that we lost sight of what this community was supposed to be. We violated our own charter. We've been, in a sense, a nuisance." He paused, a flicker of something that looked like respect in his eyes. "We're here to make amends. We're dropping the lawsuit. We're going to work with the city to get your property rezoned as a historical landmark so this never happens again. And we've set up a trust in your family's name, a fund for the preservation of the Oakhaven Ranch. It's an apology." He slid a document across the table. It wasn't a legal threat. It was an offering of peace. Silas didn't touch it. He just looked at Finch, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Mr. Finch, you had it wrong from the start. This isn't about apologies. It's about respect. You tried to control the land, but the land always has its own way of fighting back." And in the silence that followed, a powerful truth hung in the air. The HOA had come to dominate, but the Oakhaven family, with their quiet strength and deep connection to the earth, had simply endured. Their victory wasn't in a courtroom, but in the soil beneath their feet.